So Rosemary's and my kids just got back from camp. They'd been gone for a couple of weeks, and we decided, I think that the last time we went any place without kids was maybe like about 10 years ago for 36 hours. So we decided, we should probably use the time and go do something kidless. And we did. We went to Washington, D.C., and went to a few museums. And one of the museums we wound up at was the Hirshhorn Museum, which is a modern art museum. And first floor, when we got there, was an installation by Yoko Ono. And I don't know whether my problem with Yoko Ono has something to do with the Beatles, but anytime I see something by Yoko Ono, I'm like, I roll my eyes. For whatever reason, I have a problem. I can't identify it. But here is this great big wall, and I'd say it's like 30 feet long. It's probably 20 feet high. And on the very top of the wall, it says in black capital letters, "My mommy is beautiful." And there is a table, and there are blank white index cards and duct tape and marker. And people have been writing things and sticking them on the wall. And the wall is covered with duct tape and index cards. So I breezed past all of that, not paying any attention, to go look at actual art, thank you very much, and saw some fantastic stuff. And I'm finished. I told Rosemary, I'd meet her downstairs at this certain time. So I'm waiting for Rosemary sitting on a bench watching this installation happen with all these people continuing to stick the index cards on the wall. And I am compelled. I think, okay, well, I'll fill one out and take a picture for my mom. It's a nice thing to do. So I go and I grab a card and I sit down with a pencil and I start writing. And I get a little choked up thinking about my mom and writing what I'm writing on the card. And then I get my piece of duct tape and I sarcastically, I guess, walk up to the wall, because that's how I am. And I slap the card with the duct tape on the wall. And when I do, my whole body, of course, is very close to all of these thousands of index cards. And they are written, some in different languages. I have no idea what they say. And people have put pictures of their mothers on the wall. And there are cards that have been filled out by children who can barely write. And there are cards written by 90-year-old men at the end of their lives. And there are cards with people talking about their broken relationships with their mother that they need mending for. And people who are just, saying, "My mom's great!" And like all of these different voices. And suddenly, I got sucked in completely into this wall where when I stuck my card on the wall, it was no longer something I was doing for my mother. I got completely taken in to this transcendent experience where I was in front of just motherhood. And everybody's mother was my mother. And I was everybody's mother. And I got completely absorbed in it and started to cry. And it was the best part of the day, as much as I resent it. And I realized, too, that with my hand on this wall, it made me think of the time that I got, because I'm very lucky, very blessed, to go to Jerusalem, to the Western Wall, also known as the Wailing Wall. And I was very excited to go, but one of the things that kind of turned me off when I got to the wall was I saw, it's divided between men and women. And I thought, it's so sexist. I can't stand this, just this artificial division. And I got out, and I went over with the women. And son of a gun, I'm with little girls, I'm with ancient old women, I'm with basically middle-class, Presbyterian Protestant ministers like me, and I'm with these old Hasidic ladies and Muslim ladies, and we don't speak the same language, and some of them are from New Jersey, and some of them aren't, and I file into the women's section, and I'm lost with all these women, and we all get up to this wall that Jesus probably touched and passed so many days of his life, And if you don't know, at the Western Wall, people write prayers, and they bring their prayers, and they shove them into the cracks of the wall from all over the world. And I brought my prayer, and it was crushed up in my hand. I'd had it from when I left New Jersey, and I came up to the wall with all of these women of different ages and sizes and nationalities and faith, and I stuck my prayer into this wall, and the same thing happened. Every single prayer in the wall became my prayer. And I was overwhelmed at my connection to all of these women. And it was a moment where the lid on top of eternity kind of got unscrewed a little bit. And I saw how I was connected to everybody else in the world. And got a chance, that moment of transcendence where you feel very close to God. And son of a gun, if it didn't happen at the Hirshhorn 2 weeks ago, instead of being at the Western Wall, being at a white big plaster wall with a bunch of index cards. So apparently the Western Wall can be anywhere. It's just when you have that moment where instead of just being yourself alone in the world as an individual, you're kind of brought up out of yourself and become part of something much larger, which I would say is Christ. That's what I would say. Today is Transfiguration Sunday. And it's the moment that we remember when Peter and James and John went up with Jesus to the mountain and saw Jesus pray and saw him start to glow from within. And they recognized who he really was. But I'm going to wind back this story just for a minute, because I think it's important that just before this story, Jesus is walking with his disciples, and he says to them, "Who do people say that I am?" And they throw out a bunch of answers. "Well, I heard from one guy on the street that he thinks you're Elijah, and somebody else thinks that you're John the Baptist come back from the dead, and somebody else thinks you're a lunatic." And so they're going on about who people have said Jesus is. And then he says, "Well, forget about what they say. Who do you say I am?" And Peter has this, I think it's his one moment in all of Scripture when he turns out being right about something that he says. He says, "I say you're the Messiah, the Son of God." And Jesus says, "Don't tell anybody that." Strange, right? So one thing that Peter gets right, and you'd think that he'd be so excited he'd want to share. He had a one moment of being right. I'd want to share with everybody if I was Peter. And Jesus silences him. And this is something in like scholarly circles that is known as the messianic secret, right? You have commentaries that'll give you a whole bunch of different reasons why Jesus told Peter to be quiet. And one of them could be, well, if people hear that Jesus is actually the Messiah, he could be arrested right away for treason because Messiah means king, and there's only one king, and it's Caesar, so he could go right away to his execution, and he still had work to do. Maybe that's the reason. Maybe it is the reason. But I was thinking about it this morning, and it occurred to me that even though Peter in this moment is able to say something about his belief, when he says that he believes that Jesus is the Messiah, which is a perfectly accurate creedal statement that you will be making in about 20 minutes, right? You will be saying it too. I was thinking about how knowing or believing that Jesus is the Messiah never did anything for Peter. He still messed up everything. He got egomaniacal and thought he was going to go with Jesus to his death and never be parted with him. There's a part in Galatians, I love this part in Galatians, where Peter first is sitting down to eat with Gentiles, which is not a kosher thing to do. And then James, Jesus' brother, comes in and sees Peter sitting there eating with Gentiles, and James is very upset. And Peter gets up and leaves the table because he shouldn't be eating with Gentiles as a good Jew. And Paul basically has to drag him back to the table and make him sit back down. So Peter is still bumbling over everything. And His belief doesn't serve him. Saying what he believes does nothing for Peter. His love does everything, though. Peter's love is the thing that serves him. And it was making me think about when I am talking to people about what I believe about Jesus, something weird happens to me. It depends on who I'm with. If I'm with my brother, I get snarky and defensive, right? I get prudish and narrow-sounding, and I'm just not somebody I like when I talk about what I believe. And I look at people, like if you look on the internet, when people start talking about what they believe, they just get pulled into different camps. And the actual person that they're trying to win over gets farther away from them because of some kind of, limitations that come when you say, I believe this. I don't know whether it helps us as Christians when we talk about what we believe. But what Peter says in the epistle today speaks to that. Peter says, I'm not telling you about something I came up with. He's talking about the transfiguration. I'm not telling you some kind of myth or some kind of story, something I made up about me and my beliefs. I'm telling you what I saw. I'm telling you that I saw Jesus transcendent. And I heard the voice of God saying, this is my beloved Son with whom I am well pleased. Peter's just talking about what he saw. When I talk about not what I believe, but how I've experienced Jesus in my life, or when I talk about, if that's not something for you, when I talk about somebody I love, or when I talk about having seen the Grand Canyon, or been at the Hirschhorn Museum, I'm a different person. I'm transformed, and I'm not defensive. I get flooded with that light. And by the way, when you look at your baby for the first time and you feel that love, that's Christ. When you see the Grand Canyon for the first time and are overwhelmed by awe, that's Christ. When you have an experience in church where you're up at the table and you put your hands out and you take the bread and you eat it and you don't know why you're crying, that's Christ. It's all Christ. You don't have to be theologically correct about it. What we're talking about here is the living God. We're talking about the one who transcends anything that you can say you believe. And it is experienced first through love and awe and wonder. The only reason you're here this morning is not because you want to hear me talk about what I believe. You want to see Christ. You want to taste Christ. You want to touch Christ. He is here. And believe, whenever you feel moved to tears, or whenever you feel your heart stretched out, that's really Him. You can trust in that. And when you go out and share that with others, that moment inside of yourself where you feel broken apart, and even as you get broken apart, somehow healed and made whole and deepened, that's always Christ at work in you. And that is all you need to know. Amen.